we're also fighting this psychology that we see change as negative, we see uncertainty as a problem, and therefore our people, we feel like we're fighting them along the way, when actually by involving them, by engaging them, by giving them some skin in the game about what this might look like at the end, might actually make them feel like they want to go on the journey as opposed to resist.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Graham.
Hi, I'm Ricky.
And the question is, what should you be doing to help your teams deal with constant change and restructuring? That's a really interesting question there, Ricky. How would we start thinking about this one?
I think I'm having a throwback here because it reminds me very much of my kind of corporate career. We were going through what felt like merger after merger after merger. So what typically happens with those sorts of things is there's some consolidation, there's some integration, and there's also some restructuring as they work out which dominoes fit in which slots. And it felt relentless. It felt like it was never, ever going to end. And just as you thought you were about to complete one project, the next one had already be kicking off. So there was never time to do any review or reflection of what had gone before. And it was probably one of the most stressful periods, because you're always thinking, I just want to rest for a little minute before we move on to the next thing. And it never felt like that was the case. I'm sure it felt different at the time than what it was really like, i.e. there was probably some of that built in, but it never felt like that.
Yeah. And when we talk about constant change, are we really talking about it being change all the time?
Well, I think the problem is there's this perception that when will we be finished? And organizations can't stand still. So they are always going to be changing, and evolving is probably a more positive way of looking at it, depending on your mindset, of course, depending on your perspective. Because if you like things the way they are, you like things to be consistent and familiar, as we're all engineered to be like that, by the way. We're designed, historically, to be averse to change, because change is threat, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to go, where are the threats here? And when something is out of the ordinary, when something is not normal, and even worse, it's change we didn't request or didn't design, inevitably it starts to feel like there's change fatigue. It starts to feel like it's endless. And I think there's a mindset shift required here, particularly in organizations, to say the only constant is change.
Yeah.
Because if we don't adapt, if we don't evolve, then actually our competitors will steal our lunch, as I like to say.
Yeah, and I know we've kind of talked about this on a previous podcast, and we talk about it a lot in the work that we do in terms of that understanding the why the change is happening. And I think the other kind of point you made in that just then was that feeling of being done to. So it's another change that they are imposing on us. They are imposing on me. You're making me change my daily routine, my habits, and all that stuff. As you say, we don't typically like that kind of change, do we? We like to get up, get in. We know where we're sitting. We know what we're doing. We know how it all works, and it all works really well for us. So why are you changing it? Why are you making me do something different? Is I guess a typical feeling a lot of people have, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think we don't help ourselves, because leaders typically are so focused on the end game, they perhaps don't clearly communicate what the journey looks like, what that end game will bring, what it will mean for us. And particularly if we never see the results of past changes, it just feels like there's no pause evaluate, did we get what we designed in the first place? Did we get the outcomes that we hoped for? And therefore, can we learn from some of those things? Can we learn from what we did, how we did it, and therefore can we be more effective next time round? And of course, we're also fighting this psychology that we see change as negative, we see uncertainty as a problem, and therefore our people, we feel like we're fighting them along the way when actually by involving them, by engaging them, by giving them some skin in the game about what this might look like at the end, might actually make them feel like they want to go on the journey as opposed to resist and put their, dig their heels in, hold
Yeah.
back, and perhaps not bring their whole self into the process because they're going, well, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my family? So that promotion that I imagined I would get once I'd done X, Y, Z, no longer that pathway's gone
Yeah.
because we've restructured, we've changed, and therefore all bets are off. And which comes back to actually, do we adopt a mindset that changes the way we do things around here? Do we adopt a mindset that this is about collecting experiences and skills and sharpening our tool set to make us more agile when change does inevitably come at whatever pace, depending on the type of organization you are?
Yeah, and I think one of the things you've talked about there, that kind of that getting the team on board with things, because we need to build that sense of togetherness within the team. Because I think going through change, if we as managers and leaders don't help with some of that kind of, let's get people involved, let's help them to understand why we're doing it, then I think certainly in my experience, what I've seen is you end up with the people who are resisting the change. They create that togetherness around their agenda. So I think there's something really helpful in getting a team together to understand the what and the why of the change. Again, back to that kind of if it feels like it's a constant change, what's common in this change than was in the previous change, and typically that's the sense of purpose for the organisation, isn't it? The higher level aims, vision, purpose, whatever different organisations call it. Fundamentally, that should still be the same. We're here to do certain things. It's the way in which we're doing it that's usually the bit that changes. And I think if we can create that sense of team involvement around that kind of shared vision, it can be much more helpful, can't it, in terms of getting people on board and helping people to move forward with it.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I think the secret here is, as organizations, this is not about placating the people, making them happy. This is about making the right decisions for the organization. Then what we do is we help them to understand why that's important. By involving them in the how we get there, allows them to, in essence, control the controllables. Because the reality is, certainty is an illusion when you look at it anyway. Everything is up for grabs. But what we can do is to go, right, you can play this part in this next step. And when we've completed that next step, that will create a new set of options, a new set of choices, and we will talk to you about them at that point because that will create new opportunities. But it might also mean that there may not be some existing positions or ways of working that we're used to because we're evolving, because we're trying to become something different, something better, something more than we are today.
Yeah, and I think it's just something popped into my mind that you said earlier, Ricky, as well. And there's also that, I think, quite often in organisations, what we do is it feels like we're, I don't know, 3/4, 4/5 of the way there with the last change, and then suddenly somebody introduces another one. And what we haven't done is we haven't wrapped up, or for people, it doesn't feel like we've wrapped up the previous change properly. And I've worked with organisations over the years doing a lot of work around project management, and regardless of what approach people use, typically they do something. You plan your change, you do your change, you review your change. And nearly every organization I've ever worked with, and you talk about that kind of very simple structure or a more complex project structure, the bit that people always say their organization doesn't do or doesn't do well is the review piece. What did we achieve? Did we achieve what we set out to do? And can we close it down to help people move on with the next change, or the next project? Because there are always going to be them, as you said. The thought that stability is going to be, last for a long time is an illusion. Change is a constant in most organizations, if not all organizations, and for good reason, because if they don't change, then the organization no longer exists.
Well, that's right. I always felt like once we get over this hill, everything will be fine.
Mm.
And then it's classic, when you go for a big walk into the mountains, particularly if you go somewhere like Wales, and you go, "Oh God, there's an even bigger hill,"
Yeah.
um, and all of a sudden you feel like it's constant ascending, and it's just harder and harder, and you're hoping to kind of come over the other side, and at some point you're right, you will, and I think this sense of we never stop, pause, reflect, learn comes from the world we work in now, which is what do they describe it? They use VUCA as the term,
Yeah.
don't they? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think there is this pace that leaders are expected to inject. But what they don't do is put more resource in order to do that. So they sweat the resource they have. And therefore, what typically happens is there are certain people, because they can work in that environment, that get more put on them. And therefore, they're the ones that ultimately will get burnt out. And that plays this question in my mind that says, how do we help them then? If that's the way it's going to be, how do we help them to become more resilient? How do we help them to understand both resilience in context of team and as individual?
Yeah, and resilience, as we talk about resilience, is essentially is a learned skill, isn't it? The more you go through things like change, both in your work life and your personal life, the more resilient you are likely to become. But it's helping people to understand that, the analogy we use is resilience being in my mind, it's sort of like a tea urn or a water tank or something. It's got a tap on it, and we turn that tap on, and water drains out, and our resilience drops. And it's how do we help people to turn the tap off if we can, and allow the tank to fill back up, or if the tap's still running, how can they keep topping their resilience up? What are the types of things that they can do that go, I can get through this? And maybe it is drawing on past experiences when they've done something like this before. Maybe it is helping them to think about the part they can play in deciding or creating in the future. And maybe it's simple as, kind of they've got questions that need answering. And as leaders, what's our responsibility in answering those questions?
Yeah, and I think that's the point, right? So in change, we can't always have all the answers. In fact, other than where we're going, why that's compelling, and what that's going to look like, beyond that, actually, we're looking to the team to fill in the answers
Yeah.
to some of that stuff. So, it does come back to, can we be as open as possible? And that has some restrictions based on the type of change you're going through, but be as open as you can, be transparent, because that will help build psychological safety. And if I feel safe, I'm more likely to want to go on that journey. I'm more likely to trust what you say as the leader as we go into that. And be realistic. Don't expect everything to be hitting every milestone all the
Yeah.
time, because change is such an unknown quantity. You pull back, one element of, open the bonnet, so to speak, and all of a sudden you're going, well, that wasn't there, and that doesn't work, and that's different, and that wasn't what we were expecting. So you've got to be adaptable. And that's why this resilience piece is so important, that goes, control the frame, take some time, reflect, Make sure that you're not sat there going, if only we had all of these things. One of the key elements of resilience is this concept of bricolage, where we make the most of what we've got.
Mm.
So you're not suddenly going to get another dozen resources, because the change project probably doesn't support that. In fact, even if you did, they probably slow you down, because you've got to train them, you've got to bring them up to speed. So actually, how do we make the most of what we've got? How do we, like we said earlier, control the controllables and make the most of what we have in front of us in order to get the best result we can?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that that helps people with the resilience is that kind of we search for meaning, don't we? As people, we want to understand our place in things and have that meaning. And I think there's two things. I think we've touched on both, in fairness, but the first one is that link to the organization's purpose and who are we doing this for? Are we making the changes? Is it going to be better for the customer, or is it better for people in the organization, or is it better for both those groups of people? But that link back to, I know why I work here. I understand the purpose of the organization. If I can see the link between what we're doing now and that overall purpose, that gives me a sense of meaning. And also, why do I get out of bed in the morning? What is it that I come to work to do? What's my core purpose? And is this change, or how is this change helping me to have that link with why I come to work in the first place? And if purpose is typically one of the more fixed things in an organization, organizations don't tend to massively change the kind of where they're going, do they? And from that purpose vision point of view, if I can be reminded, or if people can help me to remember why we exist as an organization and why I come to work, then the change seems to lessen, doesn't it? It seems to shrink.
Well, I think it feels more in tune as opposed to change for change's sake.
Yeah,
So, and that's the narrative we build. Oh no, not another change, if we're not clear of the links to the higher purpose. And I think that's really, really important. So if we were to kind of summarize this with top three tips, Graham, what would they be?
I think the one of them's got to be the focus on the people side of things. How do we help people connect with the higher level stuff? How do we help people to reconnect with why we exist, why they do what they do? So I think that one for me would be around the people side of things. I think there's one around the phrase you've used. What is it we can control, and controlling the controllables? So what is within our gift to do something about, and how am I encouraged to do that kind of stuff? And I guess the other one, it ties in with the people side, but it's the resilience piece. How focused are we on helping people with their resilience? I think they would probably be the three things for me, Ricky. Anything in there that you would add to that?
No, I think I would add one more, and the only thing I would add is about communicate, communicate,
Yeah,
communicate. Talk to your people, create great feedback loops, invite questions, challenge, and pushback, because that's the gold dust that will help you to navigate this change more efficiently, more effectively, and ultimately more quickly. Because if we understand what's going on, we can adapt, we can flex,
yeah,
we can move some stuff, and we can realize that perhaps we dropped the ball in terms of what we said or what we missed, um, and help people to do some of the three tips that you talked about around, controllables and resilience, and linking that back to the higher purpose. The old adage is, if you're not getting bored of talking about why, then you haven't said it enough, because
enough.
by
Yeah,
the time you're getting bored is round about the time they're probably starting to get it. So I always fell foul of this, that said, "Well, I've told them, I've told them,
yeah,
I've told them," and you go, "Well, how many times?" "Well, just the once." And you go, "Well, that's not enough."
yeah,
You've got to keep banging the drum of why we're doing this, what we're trying to achieve, and how they can play their part in this process.
yeah.
Next time on The Question Is.
This is about a perceived loss of control. So I had control over what I was doing before, and you've changed it. Then agency and control is really important for us. We tend to feel more resilient. We tend to feel stronger in life when we've got control over our choices and we feel there are choices that we can make. So if we feel like, even though we might not have, but if we feel like we've lost control over making choice about the way we do things, that's not helpful for us.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organization, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.